به نام خدا. سلام. به دومین جلسه از مجموعه وبینارهای تخصصی فضای سبز و منظر به نام کلیه درخت زندگی خوش آمدید. من مهدی خانسفید هستم، عضو هیئت علمی گروه مهندسی علوم باغبانی و علوم باغبانی و فضای سبز پریز کشاورزی و منابع طبیعی دانشگاه تهران. این وبینارهای تخصصی با همت و همکاری انجمن متخصصان منظر ایران و گروه علوم باغبانی و فضای سبز دانشکده علوم مهندسی کشاورزی دانشگاه تهران پریز کشاورزی منابع طبیعی برگزار میشه. این وبینارها به صورت دوره‌ای و موضوعی برنامه‌ریزی شده. اولین مجموعه وبینارها به منظر کشاورزی اختصاص پیدا کرده و امروز در دومین روز از این مجموعه سخنرانانی از کشورهای کاستاریکا، ایتالیا و ایران سخنرانی خواهند کرد. این وبینارها ضبط میشه و به صورت آنلاین در دسترس قرار میگیره. آقای مهندس آرمین پرهیزی راد، عضو هیئت مدیره و دبیر اجرایی انجمن متخصصان فضای سبز و منظر ایران و عضو کارگروه منظر کشاورزی فدراسیون بین‌المللی معماران منظر هم به عنوان یکی از برگزارکننده‌های وبینار یک توضیحات کوتاهی در ابتدا خواهند داشت. Hello and welcome to Tree of Life landscape webinar series. My name is Mehdi Khansefid and I am an assistant professor of landscape and faculty member at Department of Horticulture and Landscape Engineering at College of Agriculture and Natural Resources of University of Tehran. This webinar series is a joint effort co-organized and co-hosted by University of Tehran and the Iranian Society of Landscape Professionals, aiming to examine the complex human natural systems through the lens of a landscape approach. The first theme package of Tree of Life webinars focuses on agricultural landscape. Today, at the second day of this event, we have very distinguished speakers from Costa Rica, Italy, and Iran. Just to mention that these webinars are recorded and will be available online. Mr. Armin Parhizi Rad, who is the webinar co-host and executive director of Iranian Society of Landscape Professionals and member of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, working group on agriculture and landscapes. Please.
Thank you so much. Hello everybody, welcome to the second day of Tree of Life webinar series regarding agricultural landscape. On the first day, our speakers Frank Lorberg and Sarah Lovell shared with us their vision on urban agriculture and multifunctional agricultural landscape planning and design. Today, we have the honor to host two inspiring lecturers. At first, Carlos Jankiewicz highlights the connection between agriculture and landscape architecture, and after that, Parviz Kurafkan will speak on the dynamic conservation of agricultural heritage systems. Both our speakers have amazing scientific, institutional, and field experience, and it makes them so special because they have tested theories in practice. They are aware of pros and cons of real field work. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for your participation, and thank our dear speakers. I'm so grateful for your presence. Thank you so much. Mahdi, please.
Before we go to the first lecture of today, I just want to give a brief introduction about Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz. I say it in two languages. First of all, I give a brief introduction in Farsi and then in English. سخنران اول امروزمون آقای دکتر کارلوس جانکیویچ، رئیس کارگروه کشاورزی و منظر فدراسیون بین‌المللی معماران منظر ایفلا هستند که درباره ارتباط کشاورزی و منظر سخنرانی میکنن. ایشان همچنین مدیر عامل شرکت بین‌المللی تروپیکا هستند. این شرکت در زمینه منظر، طراحی شهری، طراحی محیط زیست، مرمت اکولوژیکی و گردشگری خدمات مشاوره، برنامه‌ریزی و طراحی و اجرا را ارائه میده. علاقه حرفه‌ای دکتر جانکیویچ به تنوع زیستی، احیای اکولوژیکی و منظرهای فرهنگی باعث شده ایشان به عنوان عضوی از کمیته بین‌المللی منظر فرهنگی ایکاموس و عضو فدراسیون بین‌المللی معماران منظر ایفلا در طرح‌های بین‌المللی زیادی مشارکت داشته باشند. در سال 2010 تا 2014 ایشون ریاست منطقه آمریکای ایفلا رو نیز بر عهده داشتند و در سال گذشته به عنوان اولین رئیس کارگروه تازه تأسیس کشاورزی و منظر این فدراسیون بین‌المللی انتخاب شدند. در وبینار امروز دکتر کارلوس جانکیویچ درباره رابطه کشاورزی و معماری منظر سخنرانی می‌کنند. بعد از معرفیشون به زبان انگلیسی ازشون خواهش میکنم که سخنرانی خودشون رو ارائه بدن. Our first speaker, Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz, is the chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape. Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz is an architect specializing in landscaping, urban design, and environmental planning. He is the CEO of Tropica International Company, which is devoted to consulting, planning, design, and construction of landscape, environmental and urban design projects with emphasis on ecological regeneration, productive cultural landscapes, and tourism. He has worked on development of public and private works at several scales from macro to domestic level, particularly interested in biodiversity, ecological regeneration, and cultural landscapes. He has led important initiatives both as a member of the International Scientific Committee of Alcamos IFLA and representing IFLA, which is the International Federation of Landscape Architects, of which he was president of America's region between 2010 and 2014. He is currently the Commissioner of Central American and Caribbean, a position he shares acting as the first chair of recently appointed IFLA Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape. Today, Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz, chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape, speaks about agriculture and landscape architecture. Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz, please.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And thank you, Armin, for inviting me to this very interesting seminars you are having at Tehran. As he was saying, today we are going to speak about agriculture and landscape, towards the pursuit of territorial justice and food security. In this presentation, we are going to tackle with three issues: landscape, COVID-19 landscape and dust, and challenges and opportunities. Culture, an activity in which about 50% of the world's population depends for its livelihood, is an important economic force. It is also a way of life, a factor of cultural identity, and an ancestral pact with nature. Within the non-monetary values of agriculture are the landscape, the habitat, and its liaison with territorial planning, as well as its capacity to raise awareness about the regional communities and our idiosyncrasy. But without a doubt, the most significant contribution of agriculture is that for more than 820 million of undernourished people in the world, most of them in rural areas, it is a means to face hunger. Climate change affects infrastructure, public health, agriculture, the loss of human lives, and other forms of production, further threatening the already fragile food security of human society. But what kind of agriculture are we talking about, and where it's being performed? What kind of agriculture and for whom? But mainly, what kind of agriculture, which landscape? Culture and landscape current challenges are climate change, social and environmental resilience, and food security and sovereignty. We aim to spread the concept of productive landscapes as the current social construction of landscapes. Landscapes whose management, far from exhausting resources, contributes to its production. Food security is the situation in which all people at all times have physical and economic access to get enough nutritious, safe food to meet their nutritional needs and develop a healthy life. Sensitive and aware of this situation, during the international conference held in Oslo in September 2019, the IFLA World Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape was appointed. IFLA at world level presently encompasses 5 regions worldwide, hosting 76 national and 2 multinational associations. The IFLA World Working Group was set up in order to create a globally organized team of specialists capable to fulfill the following targets: establish, plan, and coordinate and oversee IFLA's overall frameworks in all matters dealing with strategic actions within strategic plans, awake awareness, understanding, and stimulate commitment regarding the relationship between agriculture and productive landscape. IFLA World Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape has as main targets to make an inventory of agricultural heritage systems in each region and nation in response to the safeguarding of agricultural biodiversity and wildlife, and the dissemination of indigenous knowledge, sources, and ancestral culture. Explore and deepen mutual collaboration opportunities between agriculture, urban agriculture, productive landscapes, public space, and cultural natural heritage. Promote actions based on transformation, innovation, and resilience regarding territorial justice, food security, and food sovereignty. Identify and promote efficient levels of production and consumption according with the communities and their environment. In pursuit of the attainment of these targets, IFLA World Working Group, signed an agreement with IICA, the American Institute on Agriculture, which is the largest agricultural agency of the organizations of the American states. It also recently started a dialogue with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, GIAS program. Through both ICA and FAO joint actions, we seek to integrate initiatives and generate international, regional, and local cooperation worldwide. COVID-19 hit the world by March 2020. The following is a portrait of how it found us and the critical situation that were deepened and aggravated since then. Numbers of hungry people in the world in 2018, 821.6 million, or 1 in 9 people. In Asia, 513.9 million. In Africa, 256.1 million. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 42.5 million. Number of moderately or severely food insecure, 2 billion, 26.4% of the population. People with low birth weight, 20.5 million, 1 in 7. Children under 5 affected by stunting, low height for their age, is 148.9 million, 21.9% of the world population. Children under 5 affected by wasting, low weight for height, 49.5 million, 7.3%. Children under 5 who are overweight, high weight for their height is 40 million. School-age children and adolescents who are overweight is 33.8 million adults who are obese, 672 million, amounting for 13% or 1 in 8 adults. This is figures from the Health World Organization stating the imbalance between them who are suffering for lack of food security or not having sufficient nutritional healthy food to eat, and those who are overweight and deal with other health problems for that. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 40 million people every night go to sleep without having met their minimum food needs. 6% of the inhabitants are undernourished, a figure that in 2019 was increasing for the third consecutive year on family farming, representing 60% of the agricultural effort along the continent. Small farmers, including women and youth, suffer from lack of access to infrastructure, education, and technology. More than 60% of family farmers are at poverty level. Additionally, 8.4% of women experience gaps in their food security, in contrast with 6.9% for men. So this is how the COVID-19 pandemic met us. We were there then, in a context where the population at world level was in an accelerated manner was growing, mainly in metropolitan and urban areas. And at the same time, the people that were undernourished amounted for significant high percentages, although there is, as you can see in the chart, a declining tendency. Still, the world average is within the 15 to 10% ratio, and the regions of the world in the most unbalanced or difficult situation are sub-Saharan in Africa and Southern Asia, then Eastern Asia, Latin America, and South America. We see these figures now in the map, where the percentage of nourishment goes from yellow, when it's around in the range of 5 to 10% of the population of that area, and it goes to the red as this undernourishment increases. The gray areas are areas in which FAO, who is the author of the map, didn't have information at the moment. Prevalence of malnutrition in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mesoamerica has a higher prevalence of malnutrition, affecting up to 10.3% of the population. Malnutrition prevalence varies widely through Latin America and the Caribbean. Brazil and Uruguay were the only countries with prevalence of malnutrition lower than 2.5 between 2014 and 2016. Prevalence of chronic malnutrition, acute, and mortality in minor children under 5 is nevertheless in Latin America and the Caribbean decreasing over time. Still, these are significant figures. We'll have a look at the same we were commenting on in these charts about prevalence of malnutrition, and also the mortality rate. Poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean operates as a mechanism of reproduction of gaps between urban and rural, and affects access to services, basic services, health, education, and infrastructure among others. Here we have a look at the condition of extreme poverty around the world, where again the color code goes from light green to darker green for the areas that are between the lowest percentages, and it goes more serious to alarming and extreme poverty in those that go from yellow to orange to dark red. Now we see the same information. We can see again South Asia at the top of the extreme poverty, and South Africa at the bottom. On the other side, we can see that on the red bottom, the poverty amount of the population of the world, and then it goes through the green up to the top when this ratio diminishes. Here we go again, another map to have a look at how extreme poverty is distributed around the world. Again, dark green or green goes for the places where the percentage of extreme poverty is less to non-existent. And then it moves to pink and red and darker red as the situation gets serious. Here we can have a look at the same thing about the extreme poverty worldwide by the year 2015. Again, FAO indicators. And then we got up to the point where this is related to what is called the Global Hunger Index. And we see how South Asia is at the highest level. And Africa, south of Sahara, is the one that follows. And then Near East and North Africa, East and South Asia, and finally Latin America. The colors go from black, under 5 mortality rate, gray, wasting in children, white, stunting in children, and green, proportion of undernourished. Again, the hunger map. Sorry. United Nations Development Goals were signed by 2015, dealing with all the problems of climate change and global warming, and through a path that led all the World Organization from 1972 in Stockholm to Paris in 2016. In 2015, the 17 United Nations Development Goals for sustainable development were signed. And then the second of these goals was zero hunger. However, we are already in 2020, and we got only 10 years to try to accomplish this zero hunger goal. To reach the United Nations Hunger Goal Zero in 2030, globally, $265 million per year would be needed during the period 2016 to 2030, which broken down into US dollars per year, it would be 67 million for social protection US dollar and 180 billion for pro-poor investments. So there is this institutional effort, but we know that the real actions in our countries and in our regions doesn't go so hand in hand with these goals and targets. Poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean, despite the important progress observed through the last 15 years, the rate of poverty and extreme poverty in rural areas of Latin America and the Caribbean represents about 1 times and 2.6 times the rates from urban areas. And this is a ratio and a condition that goes in the same proportion all around the world, meaning that rural areas have their disparities, their difficulties, their conflicts, at least twice as much as the urban ones, and usually and many times 3 or more times. Problems are then more serious, and the rurality, the present rurality, is somehow a synonym of these unfair conditions. Here we have a look at the same, how it works, the difference between rural and urban, and how the agriculture suffers in a higher proportion in the rural areas. Also, the relationship between labor insertion of occupied rural population by sector and categories and sex, in the way that you can see the extreme difference between rural and urban in the different labor areas and their insertion. Then how, of course, it represents then a lack of access to food. This is again the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. And then the chart is showing the dependence or the relationship between the access to food according to the level of employment. We're facing this pandemic period, but we can somehow also is foreseeable the end of this period to be expected by us. At some unexpected moment in different regions, countries, and communities with various rhythms and fashions, in a process through time, finally the pandemic will come to an end. The end of the present pandemic has become a scenario of permanent comment and constant reflection in the most diverse fields, as a result of which possible changes in paradigms and management models are announced and proposed. The reconsideration of human society as part of the species and regarded as just one more inhabitant of nature, and not as its owner, appears repeatedly in several of the new and reformulated approaches. It can be also regarded upon as a return to the future, a future where humanity, nature, and society will have a new chance to try to do things differently. However, the return to a controlled or COVID-free world will not happen at once, a certain day, but through a considerable process of transitions with very different nuances by groups of countries and with marked impact of the reorganization of the hegemonic groups leading production and international trade. For the purposes of this presentation, I will focus on the priority issues in which we at IFLA World Working Group on Agricultural Landscape are preparing for this transition. First of all, and before entering into the agricultural aspects, I would like to speak a little bit about landscape itself, in the sense that for the last 20 or 30 years, ecological restoration and groups of ecologists and environmentalists have taken the lead in regard to the warming issues and to the climate change, ways of try to get adapted or resilient to it. And in this regard, in many institutions and organizations, landscape has suffered in a way that we made a long way up to during the last century, trying to position landscape as an activity, as a profession, which has a holistic approach and an interdisciplinary view. And there was the risk during the last decades that landscape, for some, not for us, landscape architects, but within the planning teams or even the political authorities, it was somehow disregarded one of our main and most important issues, which is the fact that we don't only see the physiographic issues, the geological issues, the geographic or economic, but we look at things in a holistic way. And within this holistic way, perception, meaning, understanding, significance are crucial factors, and they do have to deal with the population living in our countries, and above all, and certainly in our rural areas. And then landscape is landscape architects. We are called to gain, position within this group, to recover and to continue to make emphasis in this our vision, in which the physical, the geographical, the built environment, and the economic issues are very important to us. But we are the professionals that our call is to look at how all this is perceived, how we feel in regard to landscape, and how landscape reflects culture and identity. So I wanted to make this parenthesis, because even if we are talking in our IFLA World Level Working Group on Architecture, on agricultural landscape, about crucial issues, as the one I'm going to talk about now, we never for a minute stopped understanding and bearing in mind the important relationship of landscape architecture with culture, with perception, with feelings, with society, with meaning, and with history, and with identity. And so does the agriculture as well. Having said this, I will continue to state the certain crucial issues we are discussing in order to face the transition. And these are, first of all, a change in vision on the rural. Just I was talking about how the rural areas are somehow stigmatized as places where all the problems you may have are more serious, more deeper, are deep in a more a crucial way than in the urban or in the intermediate areas. And this is going to change. So we are going to talk a lot about how coming out, even now, going through the pandemic or the pandemic situation, we have already started to try to emphasize rural as a different issue. Rural as the change, rural as the space and the place for opportunities rather than the place where everything was abandoned and falling down. So change of vision on the rural is one of our key issues as members of our society and also as landscape architects. Emphasis on productive landscapes and alternative forms of agriculture, continuity of initiatives in progress at the outbreak of the pandemic, emphasis on regeneration and ecological restoration, commitment to indigenous techniques, identity and ancestral values, opportunity for the bioeconomic and circular economy, and new consumer distribution models. It means that we are somehow outlining what the new vision for the rural is through all these three key aspects. A change of vision on the rural. From a geographical perspective, the rural is no longer considered as a space of deficiencies and poverty. It means understood as a space of opportunities to transform food and energy system and promote ecosystem services for the conservation of biodiversity, the fight against climate change, and sustainable management of natural resources like land and water. The rural areas are becoming, and even the rural, say, sectors of the urban areas, or the new rural coming into the cities, is a place of opportunity. But for us, I mean Latin America, Middle East, Africa, countries where we don't have these problems of lack of space for agriculture, and most of our population lives most of our population, which needs our help and support, lives in rural areas. So this motto about promoting this new vision and this and make our strategic plans and our designs trying to build up this new vision on the rural, which is the rural as the place of opportunities and the place to recover the relationship between society and nature. We are moving forward. We face a complex world scenario with less economic growth, greater volatility, trade restrictions, and with the need to act against climate change. Due to this situation, according to the United Nations Economic Municipal, an additional fund of about US $6 billion would have to be allocated throughout the regions to full social protection needs. Also, another 2,000 millions ought to be allocated in order to support proper productive initiatives. Setting up a strategy for food security. IFLA Working Group on Agricultural Landscape poses to develop a strategy disponibility, access. For food disponibility, we refer to food supply, which depends on national and local agricultural production or imports. Regarding access, we are making reference to the availability of resources within which households count. For example, financial, physical, to purchase a quantity of appropriate food or to produce and serve themselves to this appropriate quantity of food. Use refers to the quality of food required to get the proper nutrition status for the healthy way of living diversity, important component of food use associated with healthier diets and nutritional improvements. Regarding stability, we refer to the capacity to have constant access to adequate quantities of quality of food. And then we were making reference in regard to all this about how production was considered up to now, how the growth of the commercial industrial agriculture enterprise has as a target, as a main objective, the say infinite to the non-stop growing to increase their production and their utilities. We are looking at things in a different way. We are already dealing with a situation in which production that is not any longer the main issue, the main target for production, but as we were saying, is food security, that we can all have, we need for a healthy life. And in this regard, not only production is changing, but also the distribution system that makes food so dearer, makes the prices to get up and up and being higher and higher all the time. So this new situation, this new rurality, this new presence of the rural within the urban, this new closeness between agriculture and nature is allowing us to move forward to models of production that were already there, but that were not used, and at the moment are being used because of the situation of the pandemic. But also they are paving our way to a different concept of what production, what means production in terms of target for agriculture, and also distribution. In this way, we see that in many cases already models in which the food is directly consumed where it is produced. And this would, if this continues, this trend continues, will generate amazing changes and important changes within the spatial distribution of agriculture and economic activities and our relationship with food. How to maintain a sustainable supply for food security? Promoting sustainable agriculture, decreasing food losses, reducing the gender gap, promoting measures of adaptation to climate change and management of natural disasters, improving access to public and green infrastructure. FAO estimates that around a third of the food produced in the world, meaning 1.3 billion tons per year, is lost before consumption. 1.3 billion tons per year lost before consumption. These losses occur due to handling, distribution, storage, and consumer behavior problems. We have to stop that. And definitely we are changing that already. How to improve nutritional results? Designing and implementing agricultural solutions nutrition sensitive, empowering the women and strengthening their social and economic status, implementing condition transfers with appropriate targeting and monitoring, promoting the nutritional equipment of children and adolescents, improving water and sanitation services, as well as implementing food safety interventions. Food security, understood as a way of life and in relation to nature, together with the environment, close to new concepts of rurality and urbanity, opens up a number of options for the improvement of ecosystem services, environmental health, quality of life, identity, and communication. It proposes a new relationship for consumer, distribution, and community production associated with a great and better employed public space, culture and the public, is in itself a challenge and at the same time a great spectrum of possibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. Muchas gracias. Thanks so much. Now we have time for some questions and answers. I can see a lot of people from the audience have raised very important issues in the chat box, and I can see many of our colleagues from different universities in different places around Iran who have joined this conversation. It's great. I wish to acknowledge their presence and at the same time ask them if they have any questions or if they have any comments they just add to our discussion. خانم دکتر بهبهانی سلام، بفرمایید میکروفونتون فعاله.
Salam. Carlos, bonsoir, je suis Giti. Je suis ravie de te voir comme ça ici, Carlos.
Moi aussi, mon chéri.
J'ai gardé de beaux souvenirs de notre réunion à Costa Rica. C'était très bien ton intervention maintenant. Vraiment, pour nous, c'est très bien comme ça. Moi, vraiment, je ne te vois plus dans notre réunion. J'espère on se rencontrera une autre fois en Iran. Merci. Au revoir. À très bientôt.
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 یه ذره فارسی هم بگین، ما متوجه نشدیم. ببخشید.
آقای دکتر، من کارلوس رو توی کمیته ما هست، کمیته بین المللی یونسکو هست، منظر فرهنگی. من کاستاریکا وقتی که جلسه کمیتمون بود رفتم اونجا. کارلوس خیلی محبت کرد. من یه سخنرانی تو دانشکده معماری کاستاریکا داشتم و توی جلسه داشتم و کارلوس اینقدر محبت کرد، خونه‌اش هم ما رو دعوت کرد و واقعا توی جلسات ISSL ایشون رو همیشه میبینم و یه مدتی واقعا جلسات نه من رفتم نه ایشون. به همین جهت بعد از سالها دیدمش، خواستم سلام بکنم بهش. مرسی بچه ها.
مرسی، خیلی ممنون. خانم دکتر، حضور شما واقعا باعث افتخار ماست. خیلی لطف کردین که تشریف آوردین. من اساتید دیگه هم دیدم. آقای دکتر متشکرم. آقای دکتر سوزنچی هم دیدم، خیلی ممنون که تشریف آوردین. آقای دکتر خلیل نژاد، آقای دکتر حیدری، آقای دکتر سلطانی فر، مرسی. از دانشگاه خیلی زیادی اینجا تشریف دارن، من خیلی خوشحالم. حالا هم میتونن اگر سوالی یا کامنتی دارن دوستان تایپ بکنن یا اینکه میکروفونشون رو فعال بکنیم صحبت بکنن. If you have any questions, you can just activate your microphone. You can ask your questions verbally or just type your questions and we ask your questions from Carlos. Or Armin, if there is anything else that you want to add or any questions that you have, it would be great. It's a good time to ask.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Carlos. It was amazing. I have a question. In our working group, our agricultural and landscape working group, you have beautifully defined some lines between agriculture and landscape architecture, some field of work. Could you please let me know something a little about these lines of connection? For example, urban agriculture, agricultural heritage, very brief, of course.
Okay. We are dealing with that at the moment. We are discussing this. That I made a proposal that we are going to. As you know, there are 5 different leaders of the 5 different world level regions, and Armin is the representative for the Middle East, and there is somebody from Asia, Africa, and Europe, and the Americas as well. So we work with a certain openness and freedom for each leader in his or her region, but we want to have certain points that we share as a sort of as if it was a framework, say an overall philosophy that all the different actions that are going to be implemented through different action plans in each region do fall among three axes. And then these axes are the one that I believe Armin wanted me to tell you what they are. And then I see there is what we should call a very well known and very well considered axis. It has to do with ancestral culture, with ancestral techniques, with plants that were used and are not used any longer, that might be reused, and also with the traditional features of agriculture as part of the cultural identity. So it's got to do this axis that I would say is one of the three axes. It's got to do more with the cultural side of agriculture in relation to landscape. The rural atlas of the world is being developed for many years now, about 10 years or more. And then different countries are doing their rural atlas. But at the moment, it's so different because what is rural is not rural anymore. We are trying to redefine the rural, and then urban areas are trying to recover rurality. So these maps are not so clear. But then again, there is this axis that's got to do with this perception, with cultural issues, with the traditional and the changing position that will could be understood also as a map, and the outcome would be an atlas, regional or world atlas regarding to where agriculture takes place, where traditional and cultural indigenous agriculture still goes on, and where other forms of agriculture are starting, and this should be mapped as well. And this is part of cultural movement. So this is one axis. Is another axis it could be like the, so to speak, the persistence of the existing model up to 2020, which is the industrial, the commercial, world level agriculture, the very, very well defined in terms of territory organization. And then this is the landscape as it was carried out, is the agriculture as it was carried out in Europe and in all our countries up to now. And then it's regarded as a feature for tourism, as a scenic value, as a part of the land use, and as a part of traditional tourism. So these are the two axes. And then in the center, there is the new, all what we are trying to do as a new thing, which is the innovation. The innovation, we are talking not about agriculture, but we are talking about eco-historic or eco-agriculture, eco-tourist agriculture. I mean, it's an agriculture that is not only agriculture, but it has to do with environment, with ecology, with a tourism which is not intrusive, but it is a tourism that also goes for these ecological and environmental values. This is one side of this middle axis, the central axis. But probably the most important thing is all what I've been talking to you during my presentation. That is how rural areas are going to recover, or even individuals and families are going to be in a closer and different way of producing food. And then worldwide, humanity, I think, is trying to find out this new way of producing food. Because even if all this didn't happen and all these changes were not accepted, we will know how we would be able to feed the population in 2050, I'm sorry. And I think there are a lot of other opportunities rather than going to Mars or Jupiter. I mean, I think we have these opportunities here in the Earth, and this is through innovation and through alternative ways of agriculture. So, dear Armin, these are my three axes. The axis about innovation and an agriculture that is also cultural, but it's also alternative, and it's also ecological and environmental, and it's not looking at say commercial or industrial results, but it's looking at health, healthy people, healthy communities. Then on the other side, we have the cultural, traditional, all has to be taken care of, and on the other side, through the transition, the remnants of what's going on, and of course it should be taken care of.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. Mahdi, please.
And it's great to see that so much synergies is going around in the chat box. Many people are just talking to each other and having some ideas about what's next and what they should do and to what extent it is applicable and it can be executed in countries with different, at different development stages. That's great. If there are any other questions, it would be great to ask Carlos now. Otherwise, we just move to the next part of our program. Is there anyone who wants to ask the question in person? Just raise your hand and I will activate your microphone. Otherwise, I just thank Carlos for the wonderful presentation. It was great. And I think we already met in New Zealand in one of the IFLA conferences. There, it was during my student time. I represented Iran in one of the IFLA conferences, and it is great to see you this time, of course, remotely. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you again in one of the International Federation of Landscape Architects events. Who knows? Somewhere in the world.
Perhaps in Iran, as Giti was saying.
Yes, why not? Thank you very much. If there are any final words, I will be happy to hear your final words.
I'm sorry?
Is there anything that you want to add to finish your talk?
Well, I think the most important message probably deals with what we as landscape architects, there is so much we can contribute to by this interdisciplinary vision, this vision that encompasses to the geophysics and the engineering point of view, or even architectural in a traditional sense. And it has to do with perception, with identity, and with meaning. We can make a lot of difference in the urban public space, in the interfaces between rural and urban, and above all in the preservation of wild areas as well, through our vision as landscape architects.
Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Bye for now.
Bye.
Now we have one intermezzo for you, which is a part of a documentary. A part of a documentary called Bade Saba. باد صبا فیلم مستندی درباره طبیعت و مردم ایران ساخته آلبرت لاموریس در سال 1347 شمسی است. این فیلم از آسمان با بالگرد فیلم برداری شده و جزء آثار مهم در حوزه شناخت محیط و منظر ایران به حساب میاد. موسیقی فیلم هم جزء موارد شاخص این فیلم هست که به فیلم یک جنبه ارزشی دیگه ای داده. ما سعی کردیم یک قطعه از این فیلم رو که مرتبط با منظر کشاورزی ایرانه و منظر کشاورزی شمال ایران رو در 50 سال پیش نشون میده، در این قسمت به عنوان یک استراحتی بین دو تا سخنرانی قرار بدیم. من توضیحات رو به زبان انگلیسی هم میگم خدمتتون. Now we want to have a part of a documentary called The Lover's Wind. The Lover's Wind is a documentary film directed by Albert Lamouris about the landscape of Iran. Most of this documentary film are consisted of aerial and helicopter views of different places and landscapes in Iran, which is accompanied by traditional Iranian music. In this section of the film, you will see some agricultural landscapes of Iran in more than half a century ago.
The bazaar wind had not misled me. I had been around quite a lot, yet I didn't expect such a sight. This province was my dream, nothing less than my dream. It made me feel the world had been molded by sensitive hands, not by elements. The shape of the hills, the setting of the trees, the still waters and the running streams, everything indeed seemed arranged according to the harmony man's heart yearns for. Here, the landscape had been composed by man's tender care and was quite different from those I had flown over until then. Whether these mirrors that recall those of the imperial palace were not attempting endlessly to repeat the sky for the pleasure of it, or whether they were pieces in a giant game meant to imitate, through love of sheer beauty, the veins of rain-soaked leaves reflecting the sky. At last I reached this gentle sea, for the love of which the earth sheds its blood. Were meant to have a paradise, the Caspian shores would be a variation on it. A paradise of tigers and caviar. A few steps away in Ramsar, throughout summer, the fashionable Iranians have a good time. Traveling toward Central Asia, I forgot fire altogether as I rode with the flocks over the plains. Had I been reasonable, I would have settled down in this blessed land. I would have been forever free from the memory of Badreddin, my brother, and his insulting ways. But you know what curiosity is? It has its own reason to divert us from what appears to be reasonable. Yet, as it happens, it was just after such a detour that I was to find my private paradise. Why these round, tent-like huts? I asked myself. I remembered having heard about Turkmenans. Not very long ago, they practically lived on horseback, making incursions up to the very heart of the empire, vanishing wherever they chose to in their ravins and their steppes. So many landscapes had swept by that at a certain point I was unable to remember where I had seen them. Great travelers are well acquainted with this wearing away of memory. But one day, I saw something rather strange that I was not very likely to forget. It was a kind of harmless dragon sprawling on a hill.
That was a part of the documentary. You can see the rest of it if you're interested. It is available on most of video sharing platforms. It is called The Lover's Wing or Bad Saba, and it is available, I guess, in Farsi, English, and French. So you can use it. من یه بار دیگه تشکر میکنم از اساتیدی که از دانشگاه‌های مختلف حضور دارن. خانم دکتر بهبهانی، آقای دکتر کافی، آقای دکتر حیدری، آقای دکتر خلیل نژاد، آقای دکتر سلطانی فر، جناب آقای دکتر سوزنچی که چند بار کامنت های خیلی خوبشون هم توی سخنرانی اول دیدیم. من با اجازه شما برای اینکه فرصت رو از دست ندیم برگردیم دوباره به وبینارمون و یه استراحتی کردیم و این فیلم رو هم دیدیم. اگر اجازه بدین من اول یک معرفی از جناب آقای دکتر پوافکن به زبان فارسی و انگلیسی داشته باشم، بعد ازشون درخواست میکنیم که اسکرینشون رو با ما شیر کنن و ارائهشون رو داشته باشیم. سخنران دوم امروز ما جناب آقای دکتر پرویز کوافکن، بنیانگذار و رئیس بنیاد میراث کشاورزی جهانی درباره میراث کشاورزی سخنرانی می‌کنند. دکتر پرویز کوافکن دارای مدرک دکترای اکولوژی از دانشگاه مونپلیه فرانسه هستند. ایشان به شکل حرفه‌ای در حوزه‌های مدیریت تلفیقی منابع طبیعی، حفاظت از تنوع زیستی، مدیریت تغییر اقلیم، برنامه‌ریزی کاربری زمین و معیشت پایدار جوامع محلی فعالیت می‌کنند. ایشان سالها ریاست دفتر آب و خاک سازمان خاروبار و کشاورزی ملل متحد فائو رو بر عهده داشتند و در این مدت یکی از مهمترین طرح‌های بین‌المللی این سازمان، یعنی طرح نظام‌های میراث کشاورزی مهم جهانی که به اختصار جیاس نامیده میشه رو طراحی و مدیریت کردند. دکتر کوافکن به 5 زبان فارسی، انگلیسی، فرانسه، اسپانیایی و ایتالیایی مسلط هستند و کتاب‌ها و مقالات فراوانی در زمینه میراث کشاورزی تالیف کردند. از جمله تالیفات ایشون میشه به کتاب میراث کشاورزی فراموش شده اشاره کرد که در سال 2016 توسط انتشارات روتلج به چاپ رسیده. در وبینار امروز آقای دکتر پرویز کوافکن درباره حفاظت پویای میراث کشاورزی سخنرانی خواهند کرد. بعد از معرفی ایشون به زبان انگلیسی از ایشون درخواست میکنم که سخنرانی خودشون رو ارائه بدن. Our second speaker, Dr. Parviz Koafkan, is the founder and president of World Agricultural Heritage Foundation. Dr. Parviz Koafkan was born in Iran and obtained an engineering degree in natural resources management from the University of Tehran, Iran, a master's degree in general and applied ecology and PhD in terrestrial ecology from the University of Sciences and Techniques of Montpellier in France. His fields of specializations are integrated natural resources management, biodiversity and genetic resources conservation, sustainable livelihood and climate change management, and land use planning. He is the founder and president of the World Agricultural Heritage Foundation and the former chairman of the UN Partnership Initiative on Conservation and Adaptive Management of Globally Important Agricultural Heritage Systems, GIAS. Dr. Koafkan was the director of Land and Water Division of FAO and task manager of several chapters of Agenda 21 on Sustainable Development from 1992 to 2012. He is also an honorary senior research fellow in Biodiversity International. He is fluent in English, Spanish, French, Italian, and Persian, Farsi. He is the author of several books, including Forgotten Agricultural Heritage, Reconnecting Food Systems and Sustainable Development, which was published in 2016 by Routledge. Today, Dr. Parviz Koafkan, the founder and president of the World Agricultural Heritage Foundation, speaks about dynamic conservation of agricultural heritage landscapes. Dr. Parviz Koafkan, please.
Thank you very much. First, I wanted to thank you and the organizer of this webinar. Yes, I am Iranian, so I am happy that I'm contributing to this webinar and having collaboration with my friends from IFLAC, which I have had already several years of experience of collaborating with UNESCO. Now, my presentation, as it was mentioned, is going to be about agricultural heritage, and I would like to not only present this subject, but also I want to make it as a ground for discussing eventually and collaborating with IFLA how we can bring agricultural heritage and landscape together, because as we will see, agricultural heritage is including landscape. Now, I wanted to start with essentially giving some information about World Agricultural Heritage Foundation, which is an international NGO similar to ICOMOS in the context of World Heritage Convention of UNESCO, to support agricultural heritage communities through policy and advocacy, technical assistance, fundraising, education, and training. It's based in Rome, but it is an international institution. I want to start with describing a little bit of about current food system. We have over 7 billion people, more than half of them live in the cities. Nearly, according to FAO, 1 million people have too little to eat. As our previous speaker was talking, they are hungry or undernourished. Unfortunately, in the opposite, in many developed countries, but also in developing countries, 1.6 billion people eat too much. And of course, the worst is that we are wasting 30% of our food. So these are information which is produced by FAO, researched, and world forums. We prepared in FAO, when I was the director of Land and Water Division, we prepared a report on the state of the world land and water resources after several years of research and working. And we found out that in the last 60 years, world cultivated land has increased by 12%, irrigated areas by 117%, and of course, the food production has doubled, or actually putting it together, it would be tripled. This is a very, very great success for agricultural sector, especially after Green Revolution and in modern agriculture. But this success has its shortcomings. There is enormous deforestation, land degradation, desertification, of course climate change, poverty, and migration. The photos that you see here, the first one is in Asia, where many forests have been cleared for the plantation of palm oil. The rest of these photos are actually Iran. Erosion, salinization, desertification, of course, because of climate change and excess rainfall, a lot of urban and rural areas under the water, and of course migration, which is of course a big phenomenon, and it has been particularly in Africa and Latin America the biggest problem of say developed countries. In the meantime, also we lost biodiversity and genetic resources. Particularly, this is a picture about essentially vegetable. As you see, any of the vegetables that we take, like cabbage, for example, in the left hand, we have 544 species of cabbage. Now we have only 36. This picture shows, with the dimension of each picture, it shows how much we have been reducing the biodiversity in the world in the last 60 years. More importantly, we lost the functional biodiversity, which is, of course, the bees, insects, which pollinate plants, which bring fruits and product, and without them, it is not going to be happening. And because of use of excess pesticide, we have a lot of problem in many countries related to, say, growth of food because of lack of pollinators and loss of functional biodiversity. There has been enormous change in diet and reduction in food diversity. That's another very important statistics in FAO. The global grain production, means rice, wheat, and maize, form 90% of the food. So many other species, food species like beans, like millet, like sorghum, has been essentially disappearing from our nutrition system. And of course, the impact of this reduced biodiversity on health and nutrition are two. First, hunger, particularly hidden hunger. More than 2 billion people worldwide have problems with micronutrient, mostly women and children. And of course, the double burden, which is the disease of affluence, they call it, like type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart diseases, etc., because of the consumption of monoculture food, and particularly sugar and other food items. So it's a very acute situation, both in developed and developing countries. And it is very serious, particularly in some of the poorest countries, like in Africa and in Asia. But there is also increasing problems in Latin America, for example, like in Mexico, in some other countries, both because of hunger, but also because of obesity and malnutrition. This have, of course, impact on many of products. For example, if we take the three major products, one is beef, meat, the other one is cereal and fruit, we have had enormous impact on water, and we created water scarcity, because to produce 1 kilo of beef, we need 15,000 liters of water. While for cereal, we need 10 times less, 1,500. For fruit, 1,000 liters. So this eating more and more meat in many countries, particularly in urban areas, we have brought a lot of water scarcity in many areas of the world. Public health, as you can see, for example, these are some examples of obesity and problems. Even countries like China, which had a very basic good food system, diversified food system, there is overweight of more than 25% and obesities of around 20%, particularly in cities. In Japan also, in spite of good food and nutrition they still have a 3 times increase in obesity. Tunisia is a developing countries in North Africa, which I have been working very closely. There is overweight people, 32%, particularly women. Thailand, the same, overweight people, 32%. USA, of course, US we should not particularly compare with any countries, because there are 70% overweight and 33% obesity. In UK or most of European countries, we also have overweight and obesities, which are similar to USA. So this is a real problem which we are facing to, and we have to really look at our food system if we want to address the problems of both food insecurity and, of course, the problem of health related to our food. And the previous speakers certainly elaborated some, especially in Latin America. Now, when we are going towards 2050, the challenges ahead are enormous. First, because the projected population increase is particularly difficult to deal with, because least developed countries, means poorest countries, they will have 3 times population more than what they have now, and developed countries and medium developed countries, they have relatively stable population up until 2015. Of course, things are changing, like this pandemic, which was speaking about. our previous speaker, of course, have effects, and there will be more effect because of our food system, etc. But these are just general projections, which is very, very worrying for the future. Particularly, we have less and less agricultural land to feeding mega cities. There are cities over 8 million people, particularly in Asia. They have to be fed. Many of them are poor, like Manila, like other cities in Asia or Latin America, like Mexico City. These are cities which need food, but the food does not necessarily, especially good food, does not necessarily reach them. So this big problem has to be also solved because we have less and less people in rural areas, and rural areas, young generation are leaving, are migrating, and they are not doing agriculture. So according to FAO in 2012, they said we need to increase food by 60% globally and 100% in developing countries. But as I said, there are consequences of the type of increase in food production as we are doing now. So we need to address a challenge, which is a paradigm shift in agriculture development and food policies. In one hand, addressing poverty, food insecurity, health and nutrition problems, which I mentioned, but also the previous speaker, while sustaining natural resources base and facing particularly the climate change. Now, when I was in FAO in 1992, we started with the Rio process, and we had, of course, sustainable development goals, social goals, environmental goals, and economic goals to make a balance, to have a sustainable development. And in 2015, again, we participated. We saw again that the United Nations have reestablished the same sustainable development goals models, but this time they realized that the culture, values, traditions, behavior, relationship is very, very important goal also in sustainability. That was when actually when in 1989, 1990, I organized a conference on behalf of FAO on multifunctionality of agriculture. At the time, we clearly said that agriculture is multifunctional, and it is not all about production, it's not all about economics. But unfortunately, in spite of very, very deep, good work on the ground, particularly in Asia and Africa and Latin America, politically, this conference was not very successful because actually countries disagreed that to be even multifunctionality of agriculture to be mentioned. So at that time, I decided to think about how can we bring multifunctionality in agriculture without really talking about multifunctionality, which was a taboo for many, many politicians, particularly in Northern America, Australia, Kern Group. These were countries who were against even the word of multifunctionality. This story, of course, is written in Agricultural Crossroads, which was published by YACFAT, where I contributed. This was in 1999, 2000. And then, of course, I have brought again in my own book, Forgotten Agricultural Heritage, which was published in 2016. So, from that departure, we said there is an urgent need for sustainable food system. Food system should be more human and in harmony with nature, biologically and culturally diverse, small scale, family operated and economically viable for small farmers, socially just and participatory decision making, local production with more direct farmers to consumer links, community based and recognizing the roles of women, because in many, many countries of the world, women are the backbone of the agricultural system, particularly in conservation of genetic resources and biodiversity. So we thought about how we could turn challenges to opportunities. And interestingly, the smallholders and family farmers are both victim and the winner of this puzzle. First, because they are more than 1.4 billion people, farmers. They are economically poorest of the world's poor. They are the victim of globalization, climate change, and expansion of industrial agriculture, because many of these farmers have been abandoning their lands, or their land has been grabbed or bought by companies, by big agriculture producers, and often they have no job and they have been migrating to the cities or in foreign countries. And they are living mainly in marginal lands and environments that are prone to floods, drought, storms, and other environmental disasters. So these are small farmers. It is a paradox that they produce more than 70% of global food. Even today, they are feeding themselves at least. They are more than half a world population, and they are feeding themselves one way or other in Africa, in India, in Latin America, in many countries, poor countries, in the Philippines, in Iran also. And they are, at the same time, the largest number of stewards of the environment and its ecosystem services, including biodiversity. The small farmers are very, very diversified. Their farm is diversified because they have to be self-sufficient. They unfortunately do not have access to market, they don't have access to money, they cannot buy food, so they have to produce more or less lots of things that they are needing. So our reflection in 2000 was, if we manage to support these small farmers with higher and sustainable productivity level, we will have major positive impacts on poverty reduction, economic growth, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. So it is a win-win situation. In one hand, they are poorest, so we can address their livelihood. At the same time, they maintain the biodiversity and ecosystem services, so they are custodian of that. At the same time, they are producing the most of the food in the world. So we need to really do something with family farming and smallholders. That's why actually I worked with many people, many institutions in FAO, and we organized the international conference on sustainable agriculture and rural development in 1992, and then in 2006 discussing another big conference in Brazil on access to land and sustainable agriculture. As I said, also contributing as a major responsible for multifunctional agriculture meeting in Maastricht in Netherlands. So all these ideas were turning my head as a son of the farmer, because I am from a very, very small village near Tehran. Akash, his name is, near Karaj. And I am a child of a family farmer who migrated from his village to Tehran because he wanted to bring education to his children. And of course, the memory of this agriculture, wonderful agriculture, socially wonderful, economically sufficient, and particularly it was socially and environmentally so interesting for me. So I was always in search of an agriculture which could be bringing harmony with nature. One of the major issues that we discussed in those days is many modern agriculture systems are only invested in land and water and genetic resources. They did not invest in all the livelihood and communities and economies. First, natural capital, of course, is very important. But natural capital is one of the 5 capitals of rural areas. We forgot about human capital. For example, lack of education, lack of health, lack of knowledge in many remote areas. Social capital, we have lost cohesiveness of people and society. The trust and reciprocity has been diminishing. Rules and norms of traditional systems have been ignored and neglected. For example, in the case of Qanat and water management in Iran, it's just an example. But also physical capital. Many rural areas lack infrastructure like roads, markets, and access to market. And of course, financial capital, which is the most important to invest money and saving in most of rural areas is lacking, and they don't have access, for example, to bank. They don't have access to loan. They cannot invest whatever they make. They cannot save. So there is a lot of issues which agriculture sector need to be addressing. So rebuilding sustainable food system includes, in our reflection after multifunctional agriculture, that it is knowledge, of course, but we are not talking about scientific knowledge, but also traditional knowledge. We have been neglecting in many countries, in many areas, particularly in Iran, the traditional knowledge. Culture. We have lost cultural identities of communities, of tribes, and we have lost lots of social cohesion, spiritual values, a lot of things which are very important for a traditional, say, family farming societies. We have been, of course, talking about health, but not only health, human health, but ecosystem health. We have been forgetting about ecosystem health. And it is a very important interrelation between human health and ecosystem health. As I described earlier, what we are eating actually determines our health. Market, of course, market is an important element of modern economy, but of course, accessibility, affordability are there. Sometimes, not always, particularly in rural areas, but again, market has been ignoring and completely neglecting payment for environmental services. As I said, 70% of the food is produced by small and family farmers, but also they are custodian of our environment, including landscape. Of course, landscape diversity is a part of resilience building, and payment for environmental services has not been really taken up by economic sector. So these are some of the problems that how we need to do, combine these sort of knowledge, culture, health, and market to bring about, again, an agriculture which is sustainable. Another very important element of agriculture which has been neglected, and I have been emphasizing it in many of my books and my writings, is bringing culture back in agriculture. Culture is standing on the shoulders of ancestors. Many farming systems, many family farmers, they learned from their ancestors how to manage water, how to manage genetic resources, how to manage animals, how to manage soil fertility. All these knowledge, which is also part of culture, has been neglected. and particularly cultural practices of helping each other, community labor, community development, working for example, distribution of water. There is a big sort of debate in water-related issues that many traditional cultural practices related to water is completely forgotten and neglected. So culture in agriculture is one of the main pillars of sustainable agriculture. So if we want to have a sustainable agriculture, we need to bring together food security, biodiversity, human health, environmental health, economics, but not only about money, it's about employment. Because many young generation, they do not stay in rural areas. How can we incentivize them to stay where they are and working in their village, not only to maintain their cultural practices and their family, but also to produce healthy food, both for themselves and for urban areas. We need to combine ecosystem diversity, socioeconomic diversity, cultural diversity, culinary diversity, and curative diversity. Each of these 5 elements are extremely important for future sustainability. For example, in pharmaceutical sector, we have been completely forgetting, say, traditional medicine. The curative diversity in many countries have been, say, neglected. Now it's coming back, some in Europe, but some other countries also. We are starting to think about it. Culinary diversity is the same. Food culture is so important. Now traditional food is very much healthier than many modern food. So those are some of the areas which we really need to think and work on if we are going to address sustainable agriculture. Empowering women and working with local communities. A lot of women who, for example, like in this Peru, my picture showing how women are actually selling their products, particularly seeds. It's so important these local seeds to be maintained, to be preserved, and of course their sort of contribution to agriculture sector to be recognized. More than anything, saving unique agricultural heritage which are at risk. For example, this is in China, it's my own photo. It is a traditional irrigation system of rice paddies, a fantastic work which has been done for years, hundreds of years, even thousands of years, to create these systems. And now has been more and more abundant. The local communities, and particularly indigenous people, have been left alone. And many of these systems are degrading. And of course, with the migration, with the lack of infrastructure, with lack of investment in these areas, we are going to lose millions, even billions of dollars if we wanted to reconstruct these places. These are the systems which are very productive in the mountain areas and very well maintained, and unfortunately they are our agricultural heritage which are being lost. Intensification without simplification. Often when we talk about intensification in agriculture, we just think about how much fertilizer to put, use pesticides, and essentially increase the production of, for example, maize or wheat or whatever. That intensification is not about simplification. This rice-fish system, which is in China, is a very intensified traditional system, which allows in my previous sort of place like that to feed not only people with rice, but also with meat, with fish, Otherwise, those landscapes cannot even have any animals except chicken or few small animals. But the fish is actually their very, very important protein intake, which is coming from this sustainable intensification. We need, of course, also to connect global to local and local to global. This is a very, very important. We are in the age of internet. We are in the age of marketing, and there is a lot of products which are exported. In Italy, we eat food from Latin America, from Asia, everywhere. But the problem is that most of these food that they are exported are the food from industrial production. While we have fantastic traditional food, traditional grains, beans, etc., which have not been marketed. So we need to really think how we can connect local to global. There are conditions for success. We need to promote multifunctionality of agriculture, integrating across sectors, promoting diversification, enhancing positive externalities and reducing negative externalities. Our work should be knowledge-based and nature-based, so we need to bring together nature and knowledge. Not only knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, also traditional knowledge has to be, because most of traditional knowledge is based on nature. People living in an area, they know their ecology, they know their environment, and they have tried to actually create knowledge which is context specific. That is called agroecology these days. It's a new science which I have been teaching with many other professors in Berkeley, in Rome, in Japan. So it is very, very important to think about this, how we can build on renewable assets, which are the nature, which are the food culture, etc. We need to be participatory and bottom-up, bring people's desire on the local area, the farmers. What is the most important for them? How can we help them? And of course, using mixture of instruments, not only economic only, but advisory, regulatory assistance, etc. So it is important to think about the multifunctionality of agriculture and different aspects of agriculture. So these are the background of many thinkers during the World Summit on Sustainable Development, but also before that. And as I said, there are evolution in our work, starting from multifunctionality and later on continuing that. And that's why in 2001, after, as I said, the difficulty we had with the multifunctional agriculture, I tried to put the idea of multifunctional in another frame in order to be acceptable for politicians, decision makers, particularly in FAO. So, learning from UNESCO, World Heritage, I created the concept of agricultural heritage, which I also believe in my culture and my agricultural heritage. So I created this program, Dynamic Conservation of Globally Important Agricultural Heritage System, which is called GIGAS. Why we wanted to address first globally important agricultural heritage? Because as I said, they are in danger, they are being lost. And I remember in the first inventory we made, we had 200 systems which were really in danger, and we started with a project obtaining money from the Global Environmental Facility and testing them in 6 countries, 2 in Asia, 2 in Africa, and 2 in Latin America. And this is a program which is now a program of FAO which is very, very much appreciated and and put a lot of emphasis on it. And hopefully, I have been trying to put together UNESCO's work and FAO's work. Unfortunately, it hasn't been gone too far, and particularly the work on the ground, which is important. So this dynamic conservation of globally important agricultural heritage is a program which we, on behalf of FAO, I established it in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, in Sustainable Development WSD World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa. We established it, and it is registered as a global partnership. We designed and defined criteria, 5 criteria, which is still the same and valid. Food and livelihood security, as I mentioned, so important, particularly for farmers themselves. Biodiversity and genetic resources, this is the second, important criteria. Indigenous and local knowledge of individuals and communities. This is very, very important. And as I said, agroecology is about this. And new agriculture, sustainable agriculture, need to really take into account the knowledge of local people about their environment. Cultural diversity of agriculture, that is so important, including products and services diversity. Many diversities that in related to cultural diversity, like food diversity, like food heritage, which I think it's a very, very important subject area also, has to be included in agricultural heritage, has to do with cultural diversity. People eat different food because of their availability in their environment, and also because of many different desires and different health issues that they have faced. So it is very important, the cultural diversity also as a criteria. Not last, the last but not least, landscape diversity and aesthetic value of traditional agricultural heritage is so important. And of course, it has been addressed by IFLA, it has been addressed by UNESCO, by many. There is also nowadays new landscape partnerships, etc. But again, we have to understand, landscape is about resilience. It's not only about beauty. More diversity we have in landscape, more resilient the agricultural system or that landscape is to climate change and to problems associated with climate change. Of course, we established a vision saying we wanted to dynamic conservation of all agricultural heritage systems and their multitude of goods and services for food and livelihood security now and for the future generation. So we had this vision. We were a group of some 50 people. Many of them were members of technical committee of GS. Some of them were members of technical and scientific committee, but also a steering committee. And then also, of course, we had experts from many parts of the world in different countries. Our mission was to identify, support, and safeguard nationally and globally important agricultural heritage systems and their livelihoods, agriculture and associated biodiversity, knowledge system, culture, and landscape around the world. So the 5 elements of GIAS, Globally Important Agricultural Heritage System, which also later on we added Nationally Important Agricultural Heritage System, are here in this mission that we have defined in 2002 to 2006. And of course, we established a way to GIAS recognition by FAO. Of course, the first one was formulation of proposal, including an action plan. Unfortunately, these action plans are not implemented in many countries, and for many reasons, FAO is not following those action plans, but it is a part of the package. Submission for a GS application to GS Secretariat, which is in FAO in Rome. Review and confirmation by not only the Secretariat, but also by independent expert. Designation and listing, and then implementation of action plan and monitoring, which the whole package, we call it dynamic conservation of globally important agricultural heritage systems. These are still valid in FAO and is followed, except unfortunately on the ground things are not as bright as it should be or it could be. Now, examples like China honey terraces system, this beautiful landscape. We have also in Iran, in some part of Caspian, and it was actually mentioned in the movies that you showed in between the two speakers. This is a fascinating place, which I don't want to get in details, but it's ingenuity of humans, not only for creating the terraces, but also how to irrigate these systems, but how to fertilize this system and how to harvest in community, and how to use many other alternatives when the rice is not there, including fish culture in these rice terraces, etc., etc. Another one is Eatable rice terraces, which is also a World Heritage of UNESCO, because of particularly indigenous knowledge and indigenous people. This is another rice system in Asia, which was the first, is among the first GS that we have worked on, and it continues. The government of Philippines has been supporting. There has been some external project, like from Japan and China. So they are working on Ifugao rice terraces and try to rescue some of the lost terraces in Ifugao, particularly to agritourism and food labeling, etc., which I will talk about it a little bit more. Oases of Maghreb, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. These are fascinating systems. We have also in Iran. When I was working in Zahedan in Baluchistan, I was really crossing in many of areas going from Zahedan to Bushehr. We have fantastic oasis systems. I haven't been visiting these areas recently, but these are really human creativity, not only in diversity, not only bringing water from a very long distance through Kanat, underground water system, but also working tree-level sort of vegetation, vegetable, then fruit trees and palm trees, and of course in between some lemon trees or pomegranate. These are the systems which are very complex, and it's extremely interesting to manage, both in terms of management of land and water products and different seasons, and of course the interaction between the city of oasis next to the oasis itself is another very interesting subject areas, which I don't want to get in detail, but I have been describing it in my book in Forgotten Agricultural Heritage Systems. Now, there are other systems in the world which are very interesting, like Chile agriculture system in Chile, because there is a connection between not only land and sort of functionality of agriculture, agro-silvopastoral system, but also fertilizing from seaweeds, fertilizing the land or feeding the animals. The interaction is so great, and the landscape is fantastic, and many genetic diversity and indigenous knowledge which are valuable. And Chile has been really cherishing Chile agriculture and have been working on agricultural heritage and have been participating very, very actively in FAO's program. Masai Agro-Silvo-Pastoral System, Kenya and Tanzania. This is another project which was funded by Germany, and we have been working on supporting the Masai people, who are very similar to Iranian nomad people, and they are really living a very, very fascinating life and producing a lot of products, diversified products, and they have a very, very important and interesting culture. Tourists has been very much attracted to these systems. Unfortunately, again, sedentarization and say modern agriculture have been diminishing the importance of these people and these systems. Satoyama in Japan, there are many Satoyama systems. This was one in Ishikawa when we first, Japan and China have the highest number of agricultural heritage, but this is another very early designation in Japan, which again I don't want to get into, but there is a Satoyama program, which is, if you go to internet, they will explain what it is and how it's managed, traditional agriculture in Japan. Saffron system in Iran, but also in India. This is a very, very important system which was designated a few years ago. Of course, I'm not going to get into details because we have 62 systems recognized by FAO in 22 countries. This is the update, recent update. And there are, of course, hundreds of others which are waiting for designation and need to be really looked into in Europe, in Latin America, in South America, and Asia and other countries. Unfortunately, the developed countries have been a little bit slow. Nowadays, Italy, Spain, and Portugal have the new GIAS, agricultural heritage systems, but there are other countries also who are joining. In Iran, there has been 3 which has been already established and recognized, but there are tens of them, if not more, which needs to be again looked into. Now, the dynamic conservation of this system is most important because it's not only about designation. If you designate an agricultural heritage, the most success is usually sort of invasion of tourism, and that's not necessarily a dynamic conservation. We need to really enhance the family farming, enhance the local agriculture, and promote public understanding, awareness raising, national and international recognition, and support to agricultural heritage as benchmark of sustainability. This was particularly our objective when we established GIAS program. Piloting innovative model for engaging communities, local and national governments in adaptive management of agricultural systems. That's a very important pillar of dynamic conservation, and bringing back the culture and identity of local communities to their village, to their local area, to their agricultural system, and maintain and raise the visibility of their heritage. How? At global level, identification, selection, and recognition of GIAS and their communities by FAO. And this is already ongoing. At national level, by capacity building in policy, regulatory, incentive mechanism to safeguard these outstanding systems and use them, as I said, as benchmark of sustainability system. And at local level, by empowerment of local communities and technical assistance, promoting traditional knowledge and enhancing viability of these systems through economic incentive like labeling, payment for environmental services, agrotourism, etc. There are many, many other solutions to maintain family farming and traditional agriculture. China has been very good in creating nationally important agricultural heritage policies because it's a continent. China is a big country, and the diversity of agriculture in China is fascinating, and they couldn't say go all the way always at global level, that they created their nationally important agricultural heritage system policies, which is very, very relevant, and it's very, very successful to put a positive competition between different agricultural systems within China. And the government has been really supporting agricultural heritage to do it. And in a couple of days, there will be also some 10 years recognition, and I will be speaking again in China for the, of course, I'm not going to China because of the pandemic, but there is another webinar related to remembering agricultural heritage systems in China, which were nominated early 2004, 2005. GS have set up a new win-win model, food labeling and niche markets, particularly in China, but not only, in Japan also. And we are, the World Agricultural Heritage Foundation is essentially setting up GS label, Agricultural Heritage label, and that labeling, of course, has been tested in China, in Tunisia, and hopefully we can continue in other countries to present these local sort of products, which are, of course, need to be packaged, need to be presentable in international market or national market, but it is there is a tremendous opportunity. Food heritage, that is another very, very important concept which we have been developing in World Agricultural Heritage Foundation. Of course, food heritage is intangible recognition. It has intangible recognition of UNESCO, but we are talking about how can we could make food heritage really tangible, make people to understand how important is food cultures. We have had some success, for example, in Mediterranean food system. That is a group which I am a member, a part of it, trying to revitalize Mediterranean food system, and it's very, very important. But this is a picture in China some 10 years ago. They have a festival, a food festival, food heritage festival, which is fantastic, and they bring every single food that they have, and they expose it, and it's a free food festival. The effect of GS designation in many countries has been very, very important. But for example, if we take the case of Noto in Japan, the number of new farmers increased by 71% after the designation of the Noto Peninsula as agricultural heritage. The number of immigrants from other prefectures increased by 133% after the designation, because the designation allowed them to come back to their farms and create their traditional food, which they were losing. And the new farmers came and started to do farming. This is completely new generation of farmers. And also some of the immigrants from the big cities came back to their village to create these things. So these are some statistics which Japan has provided us in 2014 in Thailand, and I was very pleased to repeat it and to show that GS have had impact in some countries. This is another effect of GS designation in China. There are so many labeling and so many food, different type of food, which was completely forgotten, is becoming again into the market and used by people because it is not only important for nutrition, but also because it has a branding of GS. Now, our recent specific work, World Agricultural Heritage focus, has been emphasizing the resilience of agricultural heritage system, because climate change and agricultural heritage have really very, very important role in describing what is sustainable agriculture, while rewarding smallholders, family farmers, and indigenous community for their dynamic conservation of their agricultural heritage. This is a project which was funded by IFAD, and we have implemented with Biodiversity International, and we have had very, very good result in several countries, including Philippines, in Tunisia, in Algeria, and some other countries. We essentially compared resiliency of agricultural heritage system and conventional farming. I did this exercise also in Iran with University of Shahid Beheshti with my colleagues and friends there, and farmers themselves, plus students, plus professors, they realized how important is the diversity of agricultural heritage and how this agricultural heritage system could actually bring more resilience to the systems when the climate change is impacting, whether it is heat, whether it is rain, and others, because it's a methodology which we have developed in Berkeley with agroecology, which is actually the foundation of agricultural heritage program. We also have developed what they call it application, similar to WhatsApp or some others, which is called Ag Legacy, which we geo-reference and geo-tag farmers' heritage. So farmers take a small, say like iPhone or other phones, and geo-reference their land, where is their land, and then could take a picture of their trees, their animals, their house, and then talk in it and describe what it is. So we have been working particularly in Tunisia and in Mexico, essentially geo-referencing and geo-tagging farmers' heritage. And it's a crowdsourcing, they call it a crowdsourcing system, which allows people to do a lot of work and bring all their heritage onto a platform. My last slide is to say GEOS is not about the past, but about the future. This is an example of rebuilding in California through University of Berkeley, rebuilding some kind of landscape which brings some type of traditional system, means mixture of trees, vineyards and forests, etc. It is very much designed and artificially worked, but it is very similar to many, many landscapes which are traditional agricultural landscape. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kouafkian, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Muchas gracias. Grazie mille. Thank you so much.
Hello, Mr. Kouafkian. I have not your voice, but I speak with you. You mentioned Zahedan in your speech and your experience in my hometown. I'm from Zahedan. You know, this province has lots of people in poverty. And what is your suggestion about this region, and what is your suggestion about cultivation and agricultural systems, and what species these people can cultivate in this region to get more money and solve their problems?
Which region specifically you talked about? Sorry, I didn't hear. Do you hear me?
Balochistan province, Zahid. Yes.
Oh,
Balochistan province. Zahid.
Wonderful, because it's a good question. I was in Balochistan for 2 years when I was Sepah Tarwij. I was working in Zahedan, Jangaldari Zahedan, and I did a transect between Zahedan and Bushehr, and I have visited many of those areas. And of course, those days, this goes back 1972, 1973, so it's more than 40, almost 50 years. So yeah, I know the region very well. Well, unfortunately, there has been huge changes in that region, but there are very interesting assets in those regions, particularly in the part of Sistan, because of the lake, because of the kind of environment there is, but also in other parts of Balochistan, particularly in say between Zahedan and Bushehr, there are even rice paddies. There are a lot of oases. There is a lot of interesting local and indigenous species. Of course, I can't say that it's after 50 years. I can't say what it could be done, but I know there has been some work, particularly in the area of fisheries, maybe in Chabahar particularly. I know that. I know there has been some work trying to modernize a little bit agriculture, but again, modernization need to be really carefully adapted to agroecology of that region. But that region has almost a tropical sort of climate. So many tropical food could come from that region for Iran, rather than Iran import food, for example, from other places. So I can't just say it say without knowing it, without seeing it, what could be done. But I think it is a potentially very interesting area, including for agrotourism, including for labeling interesting foods which are there and have not been necessarily sort of promoted.
Very much. It will be my honor if you come back to my hometown and hosting you in my hometown. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Another question is from Dr. Suzanchi, is about how we can satisfy the politician to protect agricultural heritage.
Okay, yeah, well, that is a very interesting question, because actually in many countries, every time I talk to a minister or a high-level politician, he said, oh, my hometown is like agricultural heritage. If you come to my hometown, you will see what a wonderful place we have, etc. So agricultural heritage is an attractive sort of mention, but unfortunately, most of the ministers of agriculture are not very attractive to me. Because ministers of agriculture these days, they are all looking for following American systems or European systems, and those countries have already lost their agricultural heritage. So the problem is, how can we maintain our family farming and particularly local farming system? For example, in the case of Iran, we have a fantastic, fascinating, diversified country. And these diversified countries would not be able to do a good agriculture if we have only one type of agricultural instruction for them. It is not only by giving them fertilizer and improved seeds, etc., that we could improve their agriculture. The diversity of Iranian agriculture is the asset of Iranian agriculture. Diversity of different climate, different food, different season. This is a fascinating place to really look into and to see how can we bring agroecology as a science, as a base for not only the policies, but also for our technical work. And unfortunately, this has not been very much promoted in our country. And I hope, I have talked to many policymakers in Iran, even some university people, but unfortunately they have not been following sort of their tradition that their agriculture is probably one of the most diversified, most sustainable agriculture system has been. Iranian family agriculture is the backbone of agriculture in Iran, and by essentially harmonizing or essentially modernizing it, we are not going to succeed in agricultural diversification.
Dr. Suzanchi, please ask your question.
Okay, the most problem is that we know the valuable of the agriculture tradition or heritage, but sometimes we're talking about the heritage, they think heritage is for the museums. They don't know the heritage is the experience of the past to help us to make better future. This is the problem about the meaning of the heritage in everywhere, especially in the agriculture.
I fully agree with you. Unfortunately, often heritage is about the past. I have written in many places, agricultural heritage is about the future. What we have learned, our ancestors learned, we need to actually use them, of course, wisely use them for future agriculture. Again, I repeat, this is agroecology. Agroecology is the combination between agriculture and nature, respecting and following nature. That has been actually the strategy of most of the family farmers and smallholders, because they would not have survived if they did not respect their nature, if they did not really work sort of improving their environment. So this is a very important. Heritage is not about the past, it is about the future. As I said, agricultural heritage systems could be used as benchmark of sustainability for our future sustainable agriculture. Yes.
I think some people want to ask the question, but they have issues with their microphone. But
yeah,
I'm pretty sure that they can later send their questions to you through email or send it through Armin, and Armin can keep in touch with you and continue our.
Definitely. You can. I will provide you with my Skype or Zoom or whatever you are using or they are using, but also you can provide them with my email references, and I would be happy to discuss or exchange ideas and suggestions. Thank you.
Just to make a nice ending to our webinar, I just play a video by FAO, which is about agriculture heritage. Later, I'll come back to say goodbye to you and acknowledge and thank everybody who is working in this field. Yes, thank you very much. I wish to thank everybody for this wonderful presentation, and especially Dr. Kwafkian. Your presentation was really inspiring for us, and I'm very much looking forward for further collaboration between University of Tehran, College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and other sections that we are working with in future. If there are any final words or final comments, I'm happy to hear from you.
Well, as I said, I used to come to Iran very often. Last year I was teaching in University of Shahid Beheshti about agroecology, but also agricultural heritage, resiliency, etc. But unfortunately, because of lockdown now, I'm not able to come. But I am always available with my friends around the world, particularly Iranian friends, and whoever wants to contact me to get some information about our foundation, about the idea of agricultural heritage, about how we can collaborate, all that, I would be very happy. But also I would be very happy to continue our collaboration with IFLA, and as Mr. Armin talked earlier, I'm happy to have a meeting with our previous speaker about future collaboration between World Agricultural Heritage Foundation and IFLA. I have had a lot of collaboration with UNESCO in the past, with World Heritage Convention and Secretariat, and I continue to have good friends in UNESCO, but we could also collaborate without necessarily FAO and UNESCO. Thank you.
Thanks so much. من در انتها لازم میدونم از حضور و همراهی همه شرکت کننده های محترم و همکاران و مدیران برگزاری وبینار تشکر بکنم، به ویژه همکاران محترم در دانشگاه تهران و انجمن متخصصین فضای سبز و منظر ایران به عنوان نماینده ایفلا در ایران، همچنین از دانشجوی عزیز که در انجمن علمی مهندسی فضای سبز دانشگاه تهران به ما کمک کردند در زمینه اطلاع رسانی و پیگیری امور تشکر کنم. از پیگیری و تلاش خانم دکتر جمالی و آقای مهندس پریزی را که خودشون در واقع میزبان بودند در این جلسه تشکر بکنم. از آقای مهندس کامیاب نجفی، خانم مهندس زهرا شیخی، خانم دکتر مهسا بدرفشان، آقای مهندس سردارپور، آقای مهندس حامد کریمی، آقای مهندس کسرا طالبی و آقای مهندس موسی ذوالقدر که خیلی دو نفر آخر در بحث خیلی مشارکت فعال داشتن تشکر بکنم. از معاونت پژوهش و فناوری دانشکده علوم و مهندسی کشاورزی، پریس کشاورزی و منابع طبیعی دانشگاه تهران تشکر بکنم. تو این زمینه خیلی لطف کردن و به ما در واقع کمک کردن. به طور خاص من باز از سخنرانانمون تشکر کنم، از آقای دکتر کارلوس جانکیویچ، رئیس کارگروه منظر کشاورزی فدراسیون بین‌المللی معماران منظر، از آقای دکتر پرویز پوافکن، بنیانگذار و رئیس بنیاد میراث کشاورزی جهانی. از سخنرانان هفته گذشتمون آقای پروفسور فرانک لوربرگ، رئیس مؤسسه معماری منظر دانشگاه آخن، خانم پروفسور سارا لاول، مدیر مرکز آگروفارستری دانشگاه میزوری. من از اساتیدی هم که حضور داشتن برای بار چندم تشکر میکنم. تعداد زیادی از دانشگاه اساتیدشون حضور داشتن، خانم دکتر بهبهانی، آقای دکتر کافی، آقای دکتر سوزنچی، آقای دکتر حیدری، آقای دکتر سلطانی فر، آقای دکتر خلیل نژاد. مرسی، تعداد زیادی از دانشگاه ها بودن. من اگر اسمی از قلم افتاد عذرخواهی میکنم و منتظر دیدار مجدد شما در رویدادهای آتی مجموعه وبینارهای تخصصی درخت زندگی هستیم. من در حد یکی دو تا پاراگراف انگلیسی صحبت میکنم و بعد جلسه رو به پایان میرسونم. Thank you very much for attending the second day of Tree of Life webinar series. I especially thank colleagues and students from University of Tehran and the Iranian Society of Landscape Professionals. I once more acknowledge and appreciate Dr. Carlos Jankiewicz, Chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA, Working Group on Agriculture and Landscape. Dr. Parviz Kouafkian, the founder and president of the World Agricultural Heritage Foundation, and our last week's speakers, Professor Frank Lorberg, chair of the Institute of Landscape Architecture at RWTH Aachen University from Germany, and Professor Sarah Lovell, Director of the Center for Agroforestry at University of Missouri. And also acknowledge the very nice collaboration of Monica Palares from IFLA. She's been very helpful in flow of information between different society and the Iranian Society of Landscape Professionals and IFLA. And I very much hope that we can continue our collaboration. And very much we are looking forward to seeing you in future events of Tree of Life webinar series. Bye for now and see you later.
See you later. Thank you.
Cheers.
Good to know you. Yeah.